Hello, good evening, good afternoon, good day, good morning, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to the Black Belt Academy of Surgical Skills. My name is David O'Regan. I'm a professor in the Medical Education Research and Development Unit at the University of Malaya and a retired cardiac surgeon. I'm delighted that we are supported by iEcho, a Zoom platform that enables us to interact. For this to actually happen and for me to demonstrate the skills and models, it is important that you keep your camera off and your microphone on quiet, please, because otherwise I cannot see the models that I'm presenting and I'm reduced to the size of a postage stamp. So if I could ask perhaps Dr. Rudd and Mr. Caddy to turn off their cameras and we'll proceed. Thank you very much indeed. Well, it's been a fantastic week because on Saturday, I joined 100 medical students at the Maniples Surgical Society in Malacca. And we were looking at deconstructing stitching and knot tying. Swati called the session Mastery of the Thread. And what I liked about her presentation, she said, master the thread, not just the hands, but the thread of discipline, focus, and resilience that ties all giant surgeons together. What a lovely introduction and a lovely concept to the meaning of surgery. And that brings me to the great surgeon that I would like to talk about this evening, and that is Lord Barclay Monaghan. Now, Lord Barclay Monaghan is a Leeds surgeon and very famous. We'll go through his biography. And his bust was at the top of the stairs at Great George Street, Leeds General Infirmary, where I worked for 22 years. I often asked my trainees to enter the hospital through that old entrance that looked like St. Pancras Station, a fantastic design, ascend the staircase and doff their cap to Lord Barclay Monaghan. He was known for many, many quotes, but I like this in particular, which is relevant to tonight's presentation. There are surgeons who operate upon the canine principle of savage attack, and the biting and tearing of tissues are terrible to witness. These are they who operate with one eye upon the clock, and who judge the beauty of any procedure by the fewness of minutes which is taken to complete. There are other surgeons who believe in the light hand, who use the utmost gentleness and who deal lovingly with every tissue they touch. The scalpel is, indeed, an instrument of the most precious use, and in some hands a royal scepter, in others but a rude mattock. The perfect surgeon must have the heart of a lion and the hand of a lady, never the claws of a lion and the heart of a sheep. An operation is done quick enough when it is done right. Every movement should tell. Every action should achieve something. A manipulation, if it requires to be carried out, should not be half done and hesitantly done. It should be deliberate, firm, intentional, and final. Infinite gentleness, scrupulous care, light handling, and purposeful, effective, quiet movements, which are no more than a caress, are all necessary if an operation is to be the work of an artist and not merely a hewer of flesh. When Lord Barclay Monaghan was presented to King George V in 1912, the king said he was proud to shake the hand of the most skillful surgeon in the world. From modest beginnings, he built an international reputation as a pioneering and successful surgeon, attracting the most distinguished clients with colossal fees, of course, and he had an important advisory role in World War One. He was later given a peerage of Baron Moynihan of Leeds, and his title celebrating his long association with the city where he grew up and where he lived. His original ambition was actually to be a soldier like his Irish grandfather and his father Andrew, who won the Victoria Cross in Crimea. He inherited their red hair. Barclay was born in Malta in 1865, but when he was 2, his father died of a fever, and his mother, Ellen, returned home with the family. They just had a tiny pension, so they were taken in by Ellen's sister and her husband, a police inspector in Leeds, and they lived in a small house in Chapeltown, if you know Leeds, and Barclay went to a local private school before entering Christ's Hospital School in London, and then the Royal Navy School. His mind was still set on the military, and he finally fell in with his mother's wish for him to become a doctor. At the age of 18, he entered Leeds Medical School, and his 2 uncles helped to meet the substantial cost, a dependency which must have spurred him on. He proved a star pupil and qualified in 1887 and started work as a surgical intern at Leeds General Infirmary, that's where I worked, beginning his long life association with the hospital. He acquired other posts in hospitals in and around Leeds, and he'd spent a little time working in Berlin before coming back to Leeds General Infirmary, and where he was finally elected to the coveted position of surgeon in 1896. He brought with him fresh ideas. You see, surgery was still a bloody and perilous business, conducted in a stained apron with bare hands. And Joseph Lister's ideas on antiseptics and the need for sterile conditions were still very novel. But Moynihan was an enthusiast. He insisted on clean white coats, and I reflect, I insisted on clean white coats as well. And after a visit to the USA, these newfangled rubber gloves appeared, much to the amusement of his colleagues. Above all, he favored a gentler, more scrupulous approach, a more patient-centered approach to surgery. The perfect surgeon, he said, must have the heart of a lion, hands of a lady, not the claws of a lion and the heart of a sheep. His specialty was abdominal surgery, and he published several papers, followed by, in 1905, a major work called Abdominal Operations, which became the standard textbook, and later by duodenal ulcer in 1910, which secured his reputation not only as a surgeon, but as a clinical scientist. Alongside his work at the LGI, he was lecturer and later professor at Leeds. He was a knowledgeable, elegant lecturer, a lover of words, and enjoyed opportunities of public speaking in this country, in the UK, and many visits to the USA. He's published groundbreaking papers on duodenal disease, cancer of the stomach, treatment of hernias, gunshot wounds, surgery of the pancreas, gallbladder, spleen, and many other conditions. He actually founded the British Journal of Surgery. He had a private practice in Park Square in Leeds, and I often walked past there, and there was a blue plaque on the wall. As his reputation grew, patients came to him from all over Leeds and further afield. His fees increased correspondingly. In 1895, he married Isabella Jessup, the daughter of his chief at the LGI. They lived in Leeds, and then in a suburb in Clarendon Road, and then moved in 1914 with the 3 children to Carr Manor in Meanwood. These are all areas that I'm familiar with. And this was a big house with extensive gardens that are now lodges for the judges. Same year, there was an outbreak of war, and he offered to lead a team to France and was invited with the rank of colonel and later major general to chair the Army Medical Advisory Board. He took a special interest in the military hospital in Leeds and operated on many wounded servicemen. He was knighted in 1912, and after the war, more honours were heaped upon him. A baronetcy in 1922, peerage in 1929, freedom of the city of Leeds in 1926, and then president of the Royal College of Surgeons. Some thought him vain, self-centered and greedy, but his international reputation lasted. He did respect his hands and often wore gloves to keep them free of dirt. It's also said he had his hands cast in bronze because they were the servants of his brain. He died suddenly in 1936, overcome with grief of the death of his wife Isabella 6 days before, and the offer of burial at Westminster was rejected, and they were both buried side by side in Lawnwood. There's another saying of his in his book called Taunt. Medicine is a jealous mistress, demanding to the extreme, and he who strays too far from her is often regarded with suspicion by colleagues and patients. How can he be a good doctor if he spends so much time writing books, singing, playing football, or politics? But how much more awful if after embracing medicine, he then dumps her for another occupation? Is he then not a truant, a person who shirks their duty, or who stays without permission? Lord Barclay Monaghan was certainly one of the greatest surgeons of Leeds, and perhaps Britain's greatest surgeon of all. He's remembered as hardworking. He forgot nothing. As a student, he worked 14 hours a day, never failed an examination, had never been tired in his life, would never admit it. And it was also noted he was not handicapped by possessing any trace of modesty. He was regarded as a good teacher for those who wanted to learn, but not popular amongst those whose chief aim was to pass examinations. He said, those who can, do, those who can't, teach. He expected his students to learn from him by example. He saw himself virtually, to be honest, as the high priest at sacrament, and his assistants, his acolytes, and his audience, his congregation. He washed his hands in sterile water before operating and kept the sterile soap in antiseptic fluid. He had his hands manicured once or twice a week and wore cotton gloves when not operating. He put surgery above all other activities in his life and regulated all his habits and interests of his vocation. Truly a great man. The lightness of touch and the feel of the blade are very, very important attributes for a surgeon. And I have witnessed over the years a hesitancy and a tentativeness among surgeons when they pick up the blade. I was operating on a patient with hepatitis C at St. Mary's Hospital, and the registrar said he would take the radial artery, but insisted on putting on double gloves. And I asked him, do you regularly wear double gloves? To which he said no, and I advised him not to because he would lose the feel of the blade. He ignored my request, and I proceeded to open the chest. And then there was a plaintive voice, David. And I looked up, and this young man with his blade had taken it through the skin and straight through the radial artery. We had hepatitis C blood spraying all over theatre. Let us focus then on the blade and the principles of a good operation. I'm going to take you over the top, and the first thing is to talk about blade safety. Now, it is, and I've noticed I'm getting a little bit of interference on my camera, and allow me just to play around with the This is the thing about doing things live, isn't it? One has to deal with all sorts of elements, and I think I've got that's better. There you go. A loose connection somewhere. So, and the cable dangles off the table. So we'll go into the history of the blades in another session on the scalpel, because we'll be visiting this on a cyclical basis. These blades are kindly given to me by Swan Morton and delivered by fellow sensei Chris Caddy, who's on the line, after his visit to the factory. The quality in the making of this blade is second to none, and the origins of the blade are in fact a company focused on razor blades. With that thinking, I was reflecting when I was at the barber a month ago, and Elias had a cutthroat to my neck and trimming my beard. And I asked him how they were trained to use a razor-sharp cutthroat, because the sharper it is, the easier it is to use. And that's important when it comes to surgery. If you feel the blade is blunt, you change the blade. Elias practices shaving a balloon. They put shaving foam over the balloon, and with a cutthroat, take the shaving foam off the balloon. If they pop the balloon, they're not employed. And I thought, wow, how about that for practice and feel? You'll note that the standard holder by Swan Morton, and this design, and the blade is also patented by them, has a bevel here and a bevel there. And we need to slide this blade, which you can see is kind of thin, into this groove on the top of the blade handle, and that there is the groove. It's about the thickness of my thumbnail, and we need to put that into the groove. Now, this is a deliberate, purposeful, two-handed process that requires that you pick the blade up with a hemostat and apply it with a good grip over the blunt side of the blade. We then insinuate this bevel into the large section of the blade and start to slip it into the groove. It's important that you keep this pointed into the surface, and it's a one-handed movement, and I slip it on. You see that the blade is now sitting perfectly in that groove. To take it off, of course, one has to lift off the edge, apply the hemostat again, and slide it off, one-handed movement, but you can see it slightly jerks. And that's why I insist that you keep the blade pointed in to a hard surface. I've seen people hold it up and blades go flying all over the place. It is your responsibility as a surgeon to maintain that safety in blade. Now, the cutting edge of the blade, a bit like my katana, on the Kasaki, which is the end curve bit, we don't use the point. This is the cutting aspect of the blade. And therefore, the blade should be held such that that curve is applied to the surface. I'm just looking around my table here for my props, and I note, whoops, it has fallen on the floor. So the handling of the blade. The blade is best held a bit like holding a knife. Many people in Debrett's English etiquette hold their knife with the blade outside the handle. This is not regarded as proper, but in surgery, it is definitely not. What we want to ensure is that, as we described before, we maximize the pulp of the finger surface area, and we ensure that it's applied at the right angle. The right angle is applied that the belly is cutting, but also that we do not bend the knife. Because sharp dissection is clean dissection, and your wound healing will happen from the moment you make the cut. Now, I have used the knife, and you can see the sponge. Here, this is where the knife has rotated as I made the cut. I've made a curved cut there and a linear cut here, and you can see, having colored the edges, when I bring them together, you can hardly see that element. A little bit there, can't see it there, but you can see it there because the knife has drifted. When I started surgery in 1987, Mr. William Frederick Walter Southwood would not allow me to do a Ramstead procedures because he said, I cannot cut properly. In other words, you've heard it before, that the angle that the knife approaches the tissue should be at 45, so the belly is pressing down, and it should be 90 degrees. So if I angle the knife like that, you can see it's going to bacon slice, or like that. And the problem is, when doing an incision, there's a tendency to do that, particularly on long incisions and rotating around the hip, and therefore not straight. People laugh with cardiac surgeons, say, you only do one incision. Indeed, yes. But I challenge you to do 23 centimeters perfectly straight down the middle, from 1 centimeter below the sternal notch to the xiphisternum, without slicing and without cutting. Now, the other important thing about incisions, all incisions are surgically made according to bony landmarks. Okay? No matter the size of the patient, you feel and describe bony landmarks. Now, I suppose the advent of laparoscopic surgery has meant you only have to aim for the belly button and a few other ports. But the traditional incisions were always around bony landmarks. And the problem is that particularly in well-endowed, obese people, that when you put a drape on and you pull it over from side to side, you might pull the fat across to the side. So when putting a drape on, put it from top to bottom, not side to side, and ensure that you're not displacing the tissues. Once the drapes are on, frequently people actually then get misguided and think, well, the drapes are nice and square here, therefore I am going to do an incision. But actually, if I take the drapes off, you will now see that that is far from the place I wanted to place the incision. And that I can show you I have seen. I've seen an incision for an appendicectomy on somebody weighing 25 stone that actually was so lateral, we didn't even hit the peritoneum and almost reached the operating table because it wasn't aligned with the bony landmarks. So the other important thing about a 22 centimeter incision, and part of the Black Belt Academy, we ask you to make a 5 centimeter incision, a 10 centimeter incision, and even a 20 centimeter incision, as straight as possible. The problem is that 5 centimeters, relatively straightforward, but not like that. I'm pressing too hard. 10 centimeters, people tend to turn, and at 20 centimeters, we get that because we do not continue the direction of the incision by abducting the arm. and you end up, which I would call a Yorker with that curve. And I wanted to do a quality study on my cardiac cases to see if they're perpendicularly down the middle. A bit like those cricket things you see where the replay shows you where the ball bounces and goes off to the side. Never got round to doing it, but I suppose cardiac surgery is the only place now where we see very long and large incisions. That might disappear. So, principles of making an incision, and again, taking any foodstuff from the supermarket. And I appreciate pork belly is not appropriate in many parts of the world, but the chicken leg here is going to demonstrate it just as well. It's a two-handed process making an incision, that you support the tissues with your non-dominant hand and maintain a tension. You see that as I'm working down here and I'm maintaining the tension. So I now apply the blade perpendicularly to the tissue and make a cut, supporting as I go. Now I've deliberately not gone full thickness at this end, and I'll focus on that. Because the problem is that many people, when making an incision, leave a little bit. And if you don't actually use the full thickness at the end, you'll find that your incision and your exposure reduces as you go through the layers. So the important thing is when making an incision, remember that the skin moves over the top. But make sure your deeper layers are longer than the skin incision itself. That centimeter there, would be wasted exposure. And we cut through it. Now, just notice as I took the knife through there, beginning and appreciating the feel. I went through the skin itself. It creased the flesh there, but feeling it, I can then appreciate and go through the tissues without cutting deeper layers. And I'll demonstrate that again. So when do you change the blade? Some people change the blade because you've opened the skin and feel it's contaminated. Indeed, there is some evidence for that, but you change the blade when you feel it is blunt. Because sharp dissection is clean dissection. And gentlemen, you can imagine trying to shave with a blunt razor is extremely uncomfortable. So that's the principle of actually holding the blade and making an incision. And that 90 degrees is actually facilitated because if you see that the blade, you see that circle, is held between my middle finger and the thumb. So that's maintaining the sagittal plane. And my index finger is extended down the blade, giving me proprioception and that feel in the cantilever. There you can see a bacon sliced, and there I'm bacon slicing as well. It comes with practice. And that's all it is, practice. But I hope you can appreciate that 90 degrees to the tissue is maintained by me holding the blade, index finger down, supported between the palm of my thumb, the side of my middle finger. And I feel the tissues. Another way of actually assessing whether you can, oops, there, my next model is stuck to the plate, we'll come back to that, is again the feel. And there are lots of different ways of practicing the feel. And I would advocate that you go to the supermarket and have a look around. So what I have here is an orange. And this is rather fun. Can you take your knife through the skin of an orange and feel it go through the full thickness of the orange all the way through without cutting the flesh? So let's try that again down the side, the second one. Try to feel it all the way through. You can feel it going through the skin. I probably need a new blade right now. All the way through the skin. Down to the end. And to test, I'm going to squeeze this orange over the plate. Squeeze it hard. Do I have any juice? And the answer is no. So it is therefore very unlikely I have actually cut the flesh underneath. And there you have it. Now, what I like about this orange model, I have not cut the flesh underneath. I've actually felt the blade go through full thickness. And this is not too dissimilar to the cortex that you see on the lung or the pericardium, where you've got soft flesh underneath. And if your knife goes in too far, the consequences is more than just orange juice. But look at the edge. Look at that edge, okay? That's perpendicular all the way through. I haven't gone, as you'd see here, like this, bacon sliced the skin. It's being able to feel the blade all the way through tissues. Now, this, I'm using a 22 blade here, and people and trainees are very reticent to use a big blade. But Mr. Southwood, he was like Zorro with the 22 blade. He could open a redo abdomen with all the adhesions in a jiffy, with a caress and dissection here, there, and everywhere, and everything parted before him. He didn't macerate the tissue or tear it. The adhesions were cut deliberately with the blade. Now, for smaller incisions, for example, if one wanted to take off a lesion on the skin, again, Mr. Caddy, a plastic surgeon, has kindly given me this. It's called a Baron blade holder. It's the same principle with a 15 blade on it, but note that it's got the features of a pencil, and I can hold and rotate the blade like this. This enables me, when taking an incision, a fusiform excision, again around, to try and actually maintain 90 degrees on the tissue. Feel it all the way through. You can hold it up and give it a good squeeze. Let's see if we've got any juice out there. I haven't. Now let's see if I can get that little bit out. There you go. And again, I hope you see that with that fusiform excision, my blade has remained 90 degrees all the way across. Okay? 90 degrees all the way across. Your ability to hold the blade and get the blade to do what it wants comes from understanding the feel and how much pressure that you need to place. Now, I'm taking some sandwich meat on, you can see here, there you go, not very thick, yeah. And you can buy any sort of sandwich meat at the supermarket and pack. I'm going to take a fresh blade. This is a number 10 blade. It's a smaller than a 22. The function and purpose is exactly the same, and the cutting point is the same as well. But now I want to test the feel. Am I able to cut through each of these slices of honey glazed ham? And this is again to reinforce that the Black Belt Academy is very much in favor of low fidelity models that are sustainable. And this will be going in a sandwich, as would the chicken that we demonstrated earlier. Here we go. That's the edge. And I'm going to feel the blade through. Now, what's interesting about doing things live, there's no magic. And I can't actually cheat this and pretend otherwise. It either works or it doesn't work. So let's take that out. And I hope you appreciate that I've cut through that slice and there's absolutely no mark at all. So the question is now, okay, I've got two slices there with a third one underneath. I wonder if I could actually cut through both of those without cutting. That's one, that's two, and there's a third layer. Can I cut through the two layers without cutting underneath? So I'm actually going to swap to another blade because I really want to feel. And in the manufacturing of the blade, if you look at that, you see one side shiny. There you go. The edge of the blade there is shiny in the light. And the other side edge of the blade is dull. And they do that deliberately when making these blades at Swan Morton, is one side is sort of ribbed and dull. There you go. And the other side, you see the edge of the blade there, shiny in the light. They do that because if there was shiny on both sides and extra sharp, you would lose that feel of the blade. And I did not appreciate that until I visited their factory. So here we go. I want to go through two layers. We'll have a go. Note that I'm supporting the tissue with my hand. Let's see if this works. Okay. One. And I've gone through the second layer. There you go. Second layer has gone through, but I haven't cut the third layer. So with practice, you can learn to feel the depth of the blade. This doesn't require force, far from it. When you stand properly, and we've talked about that previously, what I'm actually doing is applying no more than the weight of my forearm to this blade. And the last challenge is, can I cut this last slice without cutting the bread underneath? Now, who would have thought that making a sandwich, some lovely bits of ham, put some pickle on that later, and that is going to be my post-demonstration sandwich after we've gone through the other elements of operating this evening. So that is understanding the layers and understanding the feel. And I invite you to come back to me with ideas from your part of the world in fruit or whatever to practice. Now, the last one. This is a fun exercise. And again, this is a piece of salmon. You can use a piece of fish. And I'm going to use this to demonstrate the last technique of using the knife. And that is to actually take the skin off this piece of fish with a 22 blade. I'll probably use the blade again, pair of forceps, and the idea now is I'm going to develop a plane. So this is a different way of holding the blade. Now it's not held in the palm with finger down. I'm holding it across the base of my fingers, and I'm going to apply this like a brush. So imagine I'm dissecting off a layer. That's the layer I'm developing, and I'm using my blade to brush against the surface and at the junction. And that is a very effective way of brushing technique of developing layers and planes. So I haven't started this yet, but we'll try go from this corner. See what I mean? I have started, and the flat of my blade is holding, is against the skin, the flat of my blade. Now, this is where having an assistant and directing your assistant becomes important, because it's the traction and counter traction on this tissue layer that is vitally important. The thing about this exercise, like all the exercises that we demonstrate here in the Black Belt Academy, it's your opportunity to practice, feel, and experiment for yourself what sort of force and what sort of pressure is required to develop this plane. I'm, by way of example now, going to use, see that I'm using the flat of my blade across the surface, and I'm experimenting with the force and the pressure that I'm applying as I'm doing it. And the idea is to take the skin off this fish without macerating the tissue underneath and leaving lumps of pink salmon on the silver skin. Now, can you think of anybody else in any other profession that learns knife skills? Well, the answer is yes. If you look at any chef in any kitchen, as they prepare and bone meat for preparation for fine dining, or they're taking the skin off, they learn knife skills, not with a scalpel, of course, but they have knives. And funnily enough, some of the very best and finest knives in the world are made by the same people who actually make katanas. Funny that, isn't it? We have a culture that appreciates the fine art of the blade, as did the samurai warrior. I hope my point is well made here as we develop this blade. Now, obviously, with an assistant, I'd ask them to hold the pair of forceps, hold that up taut, and my forceps would be down here, triangulating the forces and allowing me to develop this plane further. What I find, to be honest, with these models, they are so engrossing. I have to struggle to actually describe what I'm doing as well, but also find myself operating like this, forgetting that I'm live on camera and thinking, well, I've got all evening and I can enjoy the pleasure of seeing and feeling this tissue parting. This knife has now become blunt. I could feel it is not responding to my movement, and I'm going to use a smaller blade here too that I've used earlier. And the same thing, you see, I'm brushing it against the surface and developing the plane. It's a sort of skill that I think perhaps is being lost with laparoscopic surgery now, and particularly as the fact that people would take a diathermy to this. But a diathermy is energy transfer, heating the tissues, fulgurating the tissues, and that is not going to heal. The thing about cold steel, it is sharp. It separates the tissues without burning it or charcoaling it. And I do marvel at some of our laparoscopic surgeons. Really, there's a lot of smoke, there's a lot of burning, and I do wonder myself, notwithstanding the fact that the smoke is carcinogenic. So diathermy, in many respects, is not a good idea. There you have it. The brush. So you can use any tissues at all to practice your knife skills. We can go on later, but I'm mindful of the time and just wanted to bring your attention to another aspect of the blades, and that is the number 11 blade. You're going to have to tell me to stop doing this because I'm starting to enjoy it too much. It's really good fun. And certainly when I was in SHO, when we were doing radical mastectomies, once you're in the plane, this is the sort of dissection that it was required to complete the removal of the breast. So the last one is the 11 blade. And the 11 blade is used really, as you can see now, as a point. And you don't just go along and just stab it in like that, because that becomes an uncontrolled stab, quite frankly. And the way to control the depth of the stab is to put your finger against the blade. And you can see there, that is now a 4mm stab, 7mm centimeter stab. So I can control the stab by putting a blade against my finger, as you see here. So let me just make an incision in banana. There you go. With the 11 blade, and the 11 blade is not for making incisions, they really is for stabbing. But just to show you this edge of the skin, and I'll focus in further so you can have a better look. There you go. Just to look at the edge of that skin. I don't want to go into the flesh. I can see that's the depth. So I can put my finger against the blade, and there you go. Controlled depth. See that? Controlled depth. Yeah? If I further back, that's going to hit the flesh underneath. But I can control the depth to millimeters with the precision of my stab. Now, this was very useful when I was doing cannulation for bypass. And the arterial line, with the 11 blade, scratch the adventitia, hold the adventitia, and then gently insinuate the blade in, keep the hole closed with my forceps. So as I said, we insinuate the blade, hold the adventitia over the hole, and then slide the aortic cannula in. It's amazing when learning cardiac surgery, what a mess that procedure can be when you first start out and you haven't got the control and the feel of the tissues. But I hope you appreciate that the feel of the tissues and the use of the knife is literally like having a brush going down your hand. That is the lightness of touch that you require, is that brush. And although it is a scalpel and you're dealing with thicker tissues, the discipline of holding it properly, angling it properly, feeling the blade, feeling it through each of the layers of the sandwich, that is when you start mastering the skill of the blade. Now, as I teach this, I'm also conscious of the fact that on Sundays, I'm practicing and continuing my journey in the mastery of Iaito, which is drawing of the katana. And what is wonderful as I'm doing this, that the descriptions of the incisions or the slices, you let the sword do the work for you because it weighs 1.2 kilograms. And it's the way you take it up, turn it around, and come down the same circle. There's one particular precision of cuts where you've got four people attacking you in a line, that you draw your sword to parry, come to the midline, and then when you bring your sword down, you bring it down from the ear to the chin. You come back at the same line, bring it overhead, bring it from the neck to the sternum, back up the same line, and again, bring it from the armpit to the belly button. And your left hand doesn't move from the midline. And then it's followed by a horizontal cut, perfectly horizontal step, and a cut down to finish them off. What is interesting is that the sensei will always say, too much force, too much force. Let the momentum and the weight of the sword doing the cut for you. and just cut. What I found and noticed over the years of surgery, the new surgical trainee, when they start cutting, they're so worried about cutting the deep tissues because they haven't learned the feel. You find them scratching each layer of the skin. So your homework is I want you to look up in Latin the 7 layers of the skin and their function. And I'll ask you next week. I'll end there and throw it open for comment, conversation, observation, and I know my fellow sensei, Mr. Caddy's online, and perhaps he would like to join in and add his pearls of wisdom as well. Thank you very much for your attention and look forward to hearing your questions.
Hi, David. Once again, masterful description. We can discuss the finer details later on, but it's all about redesigning systems to improve patient safety and improve surgeon safety. So Swan Morton have developed a whole system where they don't have the blade attached to a handle.
Oh, yes, they also gave me this.
Yeah.
This. Do you like this? You don't have to worry about taking the blade off. This is their blade flask. I put the blade in, blade gone. Fabulous. Put the blade in, blade gone. Put the blade in, blade gone. And it's just one of the many things that they have come up with for blade safety. But I do have to laugh on this blade safety malarkey. It's like while learning the katana, I'm not ready yet to use a live blade. I've got a live blade in the UK, been practicing with it, but actually as I learn more, I want to be more comfortable with my iato before getting a shiken, which is the live blade. When you're a master and you're competent with the blade and the needle and things, needle stick injuries and injuries from the blade should be rare. But it is only rare if you practice. Now, the thing is that in the Black Belt Academy, and why we've set it up, is the teaching of basic surgical skills, how to hold instruments, how to align, how to address the instrument to the tissue, how to learn the feel, is poorly described in the literature, and is sometimes described by the surgeon or the sensei. What's interesting, when I'm in the class at the Japan Club, the sensei at the end of the room can spot the difference in movement like that. Wouldn't it be wonderful if our surgical basic skills training was at that sort of level? What do you think, Sensei Caddy?
Well, that's the aim, but it's about training the trainers because they don't see what they don't see, and they're unaware of different ways of teaching these sessions.
Well, I think we do have other established surgeons or trainers on the call as well this evening, and be very grateful for your observations and input too. I can't see the names, but I did recognize a couple of faces at my computer's 2 arms length away. So if you're watching and would like to add your thoughts, and I'd please join the conversation.
Professor Seeley, come on down.
Is Professor Seeley there? Good evening, Prof. How are you?
Yeah, thank you so much. Hello, Prof. Chris. Yeah. I'm so excited to meet you all in the person. Yeah, thank you so much. Prof, thank you so much. It's like very basic, the designing the blades and also the handles, and you went down to very, very basic. That is very first time in my life that I learned all these basic things. Yeah. And being as a gynae surgeon, then we do also use the variety of the blades, the size of the blades that you
Indeed. I think we've just lost Professor Sile. So yes, there are lots of different blades for lots of different functions, and I've just demonstrated the common ones here. And Dr. Aprajita, who's on production, would have posted some questions in the chat room for you to answer. And perhaps, Dr. Aprajita, you could reveal some of those answers to us. Particularly, what is your favorite blade? Okay. Well, I'll ask Sensei Kelly, what is your favorite blade?
Mine's number 15, usually on a barren needle holder, but
Like
yeah,
this.
like that, absolutely.
Because this is hand surgery, but as you can see, the fidelity and control for fine dissection, particularly in the hand, is there. It's all in the fingertips. And note that it's in the fingertips and you're rolling it. And you've got finger movement as well. What's your secret to using the barren blade, Sensei Kelly?
Lightness of touch, as always. It gives you such feedback in various tissues.
Mm.
And so you need to hold it as a pen rather than as a scalpel. So you need to be able to adapt your hold.
And that's why it is like an HB pencil. Prof. Sile, we lost you there for a moment. You were saying
yeah, sorry,
types
Prof.
of
Yeah,
blade.
I lost from the computer. Now I'm using my handphone.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Prof. So like when we do cystectomy, ovarian cystectomy,
Mm-hmm.
and then in fact, it is like very, very tiny, thin layer of the ovarian capsule,
Mm-hmm.
not damaging or not rupturing the whole the cyst,
Yes.
the ovarian cyst. So that's we use like a size 20, 22 blades, Prof, that you mentioned. That
Exactly.
it is
So it's
very, very
very thin, but you use a very big blade.
Mm-mm. The smaller size, Prof, we use, yeah.
But again, there's another example of extremely thin tissues
Yes, Prof.
and being able to be confident with the blade. I mean, cutting the sandwich meat, well, that's 1.5 millimeters thick. But indeed, some of the tissues are even thinner. And again, this is appreciating the feel. One good one to use that I haven't demonstrated this evening, but will do next time, is if you poach an egg and you just make a little incision in the white of the membrane of the egg. Now that's not too dissimilar to opening a coronary vessel. To do it purposefully all the way through, but not cutting the yolk underneath.
Okay. And I have one more question, Prof.
Of course.
Yeah, your the 11 blades that you use, like you use your finger, to control the depth.
Correct, yes.
Yeah. But when we do the cervical cone biopsy,
Mm-hmm.
which our fingers did not reach to the
Yes.
cervix.
Yes.
Yes. So it is the judgment is only by, that the how much depth that we can go in to the, the thickness of the cervix when we do
So
cone biopsy.
how do you judge that, Professor?
I think we learn by experience, Prof, because we have to imagine how much the depth, the thickness that we want to go in the transformation zone, and
Yes.
then the depth of the blade. Yes.
Interesting. So
Yes.
I'm cheating because I'm using it on the surface and
Sure.
on the surface, but not on the cervix. So
Yeah.
you're quite right. And
Yes.
hats off to you to be able to use an 11 blade at depth, literally at depth, and be able to take a cone biopsy of the cervix without in that zone I agree. That takes practice. That's
Yeah.
certainly.
So, David, I think there's another model there. So you need to get an unripe pear, put it down the end of a tube, and then use an 11 blade on the end in order
Oh,
to
thank you so much.
do cone
I,
biopsy.
Thank you so much, Prof. Chris.
I like that. Well, you can use a toilet roll, an empty toilet roll. Yeah,
Mm-mm,
empty toilet roll. Put it over the
mm-mm,
top of a pear, and then
mm-mm.
do a cone biopsy of the pear at the bottom of a toilet roll. You've just come up, Mr. Sensei Caddy, with one wonderful example that Chris Seeley is going to write up
Okay,
with our
Prof. Yeah,
help,
I will.
and we can develop this as a new cone biopsy model. How
Okay.
fantastic! We've got
Thank you very
two
much.
two
Yeah,
things happening
we'll
here.
join. Yeah. Thank you, Prof.
Wonderful,
Yeah,
wonderful
congrats.
idea. So,
Thank you
any
so
other
much.
questions in the chat? I'm going to chat. As we have said in the chat, we really value your feedback. People watch these programs and don't often give feedback. I am contemplating making the certificate conditional on you giving feedback, because feedback is the breakfast of champions. We do listen, we do want to know from you, and we do want your participation. So the other thing is, I'd like to also open a chat room on these things to encourage ideas. And you just had one generative idea from Sensei Caddy this evening. So one of the questions here from Dr. Singh is, what is your guidance for a lefty? Well, the guidance for a lefty is just do it righty. You do it right, okay? And that is one thing I didn't point out, but I have put in the reading, is that the most important part of surgery is actually before the incision. It's decisions before incisions, because once you've made an incision, there's no going back. You committed. And if it's not right, the right equipment, the right people, the right investigations, the right side, the right theater, unless everything's right, you do not proceed. Not even the King of England could tell me to operate if I thought I didn't have enough information. It's like an airplane pilot. The captain has to take responsibility. If he doesn't feel right, he doesn't take off. When you make an incision, that's it. You committed. And then it's all about feel and feeling the tissues and feeling for the patient, because you're actually inflicting controlled grievous bodily harm. So do it carefully, please.
Yeah, I think the other observation is that many of the people on this session are early on in their careers, and the brain has immense neuroplasticity. So if you practice using your right hand and your left hand, it will allow you to be ambidextrous in situations where you need to be able to use both. And it comes from practice this until you can't get it wrong.
That's exactly
So
it.
give it a go. You're early in your careers. You have the ability to adapt and change.
I did come across, and I'll just find it because I kept it on a photograph, which I thought was brilliant the other day. And yes, 8 laws of learning. And 8 laws of learning are: 1, explanation; 2, demonstration; 3, imitation. And then we have repetition, 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 and repetition. I love that. And that was posted on a martial arts website. And I'm going to keep that. 8 laws of learning: explanation, demonstration, imitation, repetition, 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 until you can't get it wrong. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening. We look forward to seeing you next week. Remember, I asked you to do some homework. I want to know the layers of the skin in Latin, and we're going to explore the use of the Mackindou scissors. So the second part of your homework, we're going to give you a biography of Mackindou, And I want you to answer that question I asked Swati before I went down to Malacca, to the Manipur Surgical Society. I asked her to do some homework and to answer why I think McIndoe is another one of those great surgeons. Thank you indeed for your attention. We wish you well, and we'll see you next week. Please encourage everybody to follow, send in this direction. It is free. It is accredited by the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh and by the Academy of Medicine of Malaysia. And you get CPD points. I mean, what more do you want? Thank you. Thank you, Dr.